Eeryk and Simon.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Eeryk and Simon show. I'm here with the Kid McRae. Good evening, Eeryk.
Hey, how you going, Simon? Absolutely. What is the word? Honestly, it's been an extremely busy week, I feel like, in the news, although a lot of it's just the same old kind of stuff that you expect, especially after Trump got inaugurated. So I'm not sure what quite the word is, but I'm happy to be here again, I think.
Well, fantastic. Well, it's really good to see you. And yeah, we've got some interesting articles to go through this evening. But first, a little bit of housekeeping, guys. I've dug my toes in a little bit with X. I've been waiting for them to get back to me and unlock my account. I think I'm probably going to have to cave. So for all of those who've had to migrate to a different platform or are watching on Eeryk's platform, thank you very much for making the effort. We certainly appreciate it. But I'll be back making it convenient for everyone later. And if you are watching on the platform, please do like and share this so that everyone knows we are out here doing this. Now, we have some interesting articles that Eeryk and I have picked out to go through this evening, but something that came up since we sort of went through our schedule is Winston Peters having a crack at the Greens. What do you reckon about that?
Honestly, I was sitting there. I was just having dinner this evening, in fact, and I was watching it on the news as I do because I'm in a house with someone that thinks that's a good idea. But yeah, I was watching and I was just listening to him and even Shane Jones just really give it to them. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, these guys are reading the room right now. They're understanding that there is a little bit of a movement that's working in their favor, and they realize, okay, yes, we already are the party of nationalism and taking the sort of stance anyway. Let's just really hardline it. So my position is that they're finding their balls, which they already had more so relative to the other parties anyway, and they're really just running with it. And we'll see what the polls show in the next 12 months if they continue like this.
Yeah, well, I sort of, I'm not someone who is against multiculturalism, but it certainly seems to me, because like there've been allegations of being anti-immigrant and racist leveled against Winston Peters and against Shane Jones for some of the comments that they made in Parliament, but I think that they are right that, New Zealand has to a degree become a dumping ground for foreign left-wing extremists, and many of them end up in the Green Party. It's things like Ricardo Menendez March. People will remember he tried to jump the queue with his boyfriend through MIQ. Julianne Genter, who's been, harassing, at least maybe even roughing up a little bit, proprietors of Wellington shops and things like flower shops and stuff like that. They really are extreme, and they are from other countries. And I think that they are, those New Zealand First boys are right to say, well, is this, this, as to quote Jacinda Ardern, this feels imported.
Yeah, well, that's exactly that, and I mean, and it's not something that we can shy away from. They're being very, very clear and specific with how they targeted this, saying, "Look, you've come to this country and you're importing your own beliefs and trying to impose them on our country. And our country is great for a range of other reasons. Our country is where it is because of the beliefs that we've held forever. You guys bring in all this stuff from comparative shitholes." So, I mean, I think it's a position that'll resonate with more people than maybe the average, media person might think, and perhaps it will resonate with some people, but I certainly agree with it myself.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I also note the hypocrisy. It's very easy for Ardern to say that, oh, look, anyone who is complaining about human rights abuses with our approach to MIQ and vaccine mandates is foreign influenced. But when the shoe's on the other foot, the left don't like it. All right. Guys, I see that some of the regulars are here. Shelley the Kiwi is here. Fantastic to see you coming through on Rumble. And Mark David is here. Good evening. Guys, we do have a little bit of an issue because we're going out on Eeryk's channels as well as mine. Anyone who's chatting on my channels, it comes up behind me, but Eeryk's are not visible. We still haven't quite worked out how to do that. Oh, PvP is here. Nice to see you too. All right, we'll look on that. I think Eeryk is just going to, if any comments on his channel in the chats jump out, he's going to address them. But I think it's probably time for us to come to our first article. And the first article, I've got our promo. Guys, did you see the promo of the Eeryk and Simon show this week? This is, I morphed a photograph of Olivia Newton-John, the Australian singer who is famous in the 1980s for releasing a music video that was torturing fat people, and John Travolta, the famous Scientologist, Scientology being an organization which is notoriously anti-gay. All right, well, the first article that we have, and I'm bringing it up on screen now, or at least I'm trying to, is from the Spin-Off. Now, I wouldn't normally use this as a news source. For those who don't know, the Spin-Off is a state-funded, extreme left-wing propaganda outfit. But Eeryk wanted to talk about one of their articles, so here it is.
I mean, it's gonna be the most attention they get all week, so I thought I'd do it for them just as a bit of a pro bono courtesy. But basically, it's called "What the Critics Are Saying About the Jacinda Ardern Film" that just premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. Now, I want to note that it's been written by staff writers at the spin-off, so not an individual writer, staff writers just across the board. So I'm presuming they sat down, had a few bickies and tea, and probably discussed communism and a range of other things like that before getting on to the very important subject.
I want to play a clip. Hold up.
Oh, yep. No problem there.
All right, please do continue.
Continue? Okay. And so, yeah, they very likely sat down, had a few bickies, discussed some communism, and then, figured out how they're going to format this little piece about Jacinda Ardern kind of bringing herself back out into the spotlight after resigning a couple years ago. So it's rather straightforward. It starts at the top here saying, since her valedictory speech in April 2023, Jacinda Ardern has sought largely to stay out of the spotlight. In 2025, however, she'll be back in the headlines, or bookshops and cinemas at least. Last week, Ardern announced that her memoir, A Different Kind of Power, will be published in June, and 2 documentaries also have the former Prime Minister at their centre. One of those, supported by the Film Commission, is slated for an August release. The other, which by contrast has Ardern's involvement and implicit endorsement, her husband Clark Gayford is credited as both a producer and a director of photography, and contributes plenty of family footage to the project, and is currently playing at the Sundance Film Festival. Well, I'm sure Clark Gayford's probably a more than capable director. It depends what he's directing, of course. If he's trying to direct a party, maybe there's a chance. The film, titled Prime Minister, is part of the World Cinema Documentary Competition at the Utah event, and Ardern is among those attending the festival. But what I was most intrigued about was the kind of some of the people reviewing the movie. And so, writing for IndieWire, Harrison Riechlin awards a B grade to the film. Directors Michelle Walsh and Lindsay Utz had presented a compelling what if to Americans now dealing with another 4 years under a ruthless tyrant, by showcasing the capable leadership and everyday life of former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern during her 6-year term, as well as where she is today post-resignation. The documentary acts as an intimate study of what it means to serve others when it seems like the world is falling apart, and to be a partner and mother at the same time. Now, I want to go back and say a compelling what if to Americans now dealing with another 4 years under a ruthless tyrant, because somehow Trump is a ruthless tyrant, but Jacinda Ardern is quite literally the opposite. Nothing to be seen here. This is why the spin-off got my attention, because they included this person's review. And I'll quickly want to ask you, what do you think of that? Do you think it's just obviously, left-wing ignorance, not being able to understand, what she even did here, or I don't know. What do you reckon about that specific point?
Well, I have 2 thoughts that spring to mind about that. The first is, it is the height of hypocrisy. There is no single individual who has done more to dismantle democratic institutions in this country than Jacinda Ardern. She just absolutely threw out our Bill of Rights and worked very much via diktat. So it is just absolutely ironic to try and paint her as this darling of democracy in a world where there are authoritarian populist politicians. That's just simply inaccurate. The second thing that occurs to me is that this is all part of our reputation laundering. It's a mammoth effort right now, coordinated by the left around the world, to rehabilitate her reputation. We're getting the full court press of movies, some of which are taxpayer funded by you and me and everyone else who's watching. We've got her hagiographical book, which is going to be released, which is going to tell all sorts of stories about what a wonderful person she was, and make very little mention of the fact that she was absolutely terrible. But this is what the left does. They inevitably look to rewrite history, and they will keep repeating again and again, Jacinda was wonderful. Jacinda saved 70 quintillion people from COVID and solved climate change by outlawing gas and oil exploration, all of these things until it becomes the accepted narrative amongst their section of the community.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what I sometimes sit and ponder randomly is, how are we going to look back on this kind of Ardern period in 30, 40, 50 years? And I'm like, it really is going to depend which narrative is maintained the longest. I mean, surely a narrative that is so baseless eventually loses loses its credibility and is replaced by a more objective view of the past, especially when you might get someone 30, 40 years from now who's held a grudge since his 20s, let's say, and just goes about kind of setting the record straight, and there's not enough of this in the moment ideological pushback, and all of a sudden, the overall narrative is kind of accepted and looked at more objectively, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is kind of what did happen. Yes, she did kind of become a tyrant. There's little that we can do to actually dispute that. So I do wonder if it's ever going to change, and the accepted belief is that she was a terrible prime minister, one of the worst, if not the worst in our history. I would put it at the worst in our history simply because the worst things she does are like unforgivable. Not, you kind of can't put that aside, even if other areas you might argue are technically not as bad. But I would say, bankrupted the country, segregated the country based on their medical status and a range of things like that. You kind of can't get much worse, as well as the, trying to implement, racial separatism by stealth type nonsense. So, I mean, everything about Ardern screams, just no, disgusting, get off my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, you raised a couple of points there. Firstly, I don't think it's arguable that Ardern is the worst prime minister, and I would go even further. I wouldn't say she's just our worst prime minister. I would say she's the worst calamity to ever befall our country, and is a candidate for the worst New Zealander who has ever lived. And if you were to ask me if I was to sum her up in one sentence, I would describe her as Brenton Tarrant's biggest fan. So. Which is a harsh call, I know, but that guy gave her a second term, and she knows it. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in this this ludicrous spin-off hagiography of the archfiend Ardern?
Nothing that's of too much more significance. I would say, having quickly looked at it before. But no, I do actually recall someone was mentioning that it's though it's not featured as part of the narrative in resigning as Prime Minister, Ardern opened the door for Labour to suffer a landslide defeat in the next election, marring her own legacy for the sake of her mental health and as a response to those who stood in opposition to her. And so I was like, okay, there's the tiniest little bit of balance there of IndieWire's Risha and whoever was doing the review of the film. So that's more of a critique than our media would ever give her. But I suppose that's because he's not really the media, more of a on his own buzz reviewing films. So that's about all I have. What about you? Anything in particular?
Yeah, I wanted to read a little bit, just this bit at the end, because I thought the dude from Variety was a little bit more balanced, that the spin-off for some reason quoted. So I just wanted to read that. Intimate but simplistic is the headline in another trade staple, Variety. Gayford's proximity.
Doesn't that make you gay?
Is a double-edged sword, one of the rest of the production also wields in terms of its limited political approach, said Siddhant Adlakar, I think his name is. However, as a portrait of struggles in the seat of power, the film presses all the right emotional buttons, right? So it's an appeal to emotion rather than to logic. That's not any surprise. He concludes, the article continues, Prime Minister may verge on hagiographic in its telling, no shit, but as a tale of political myth-making and a young woman in a world of right-wing strongmen, it's greatly assisted by its intimate documents of Ardern. Since these are captured by her closest confidant and biggest supporter, they come with all the flaws and flourishes that living in a leader's proximity provides. I don't think that it is, this is the narrative of the left, that here she is fighting the good fight for democracy against right-wing strongman, when the precise opposite is true. She is a left-wing extremist who tried to, and very much did, damage our democratic institutions. And this is what the left does. It's like they're living out 1984. Who controls the past? Who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future. And in the present, what they are doing right now, there's a concerted effort from the media, from the publishers, from the Sundance Festival, from the spin-off to rehabilitate her reputation, make the truth of Jacinda Ardern something that isn't true. Okay, some comments in the chat. Mark David said, a must watch if you want to be sick. Yeah, I know what you mean, man. And Fuel Band says there's 2 reasons why we don't trust a person. It's because we don't know them or because we do know them. Tom in Scotland. Okay, all right. Hello, Tom in Scotland. All right, Eeryk, have you got any comments from your people you wanted to bring in?
Yeah. So John Eaton says, very curious how someone can be a tyrant when someone is democratically elected and is term limited. There is some merit to term limits, I find. Certainly useful in that respect. Phil says, imagine having a premier that had a family as well as the job of Prime Minister. Never heard of. She certainly did both jobs equally appallingly, I'm sure. I tend to agree. We'll see how she turns out, I suppose. We also have Joel Terry saying, I don't have high hopes that Jacinda will be unanimously reviled. I'm guessing people will remember her with mixed opinions in the years to come and will be the cause of family fights at the dinner table for a decade or more. Chainsaw Charlie wanted to bring up the poll about the Ardern versus Trump fight over on Stuff, where fortunately because of X, Trump's come out on top in terms of who New Zealanders would rather have as their Prime Minister. So he's leading 2-1 now, apparently. Good job, X.
Sorry, I missed that. Could you repeat that, Eeryk? There's a fight on Twitter on Stuff,
yeah, of
rather.
course.
And
you haven't been on X, you wouldn't know. So Stuff released a poll attached to an article yesterday or something, and it was asking, would you vote for Jacinda Ardern or Trump? Essentially, that was the answer. And initially, it looked like Ardern was just going to walk away with it, and then X got involved, and suddenly you've got a little bit more of a balancing act coming into play here, or it's still a stupid poll. And now it's gone from like 2-1 to Ardern to 2-1 to Trump in favour of who people would vote for. So, yeah.
I'm just astonished. It just shows you how stupid people are. Like, after all of the damage that woman did to our country, to our economy, and to our society, like, we very nearly, we were teetering on the edge of third world status, losing our first world status, and we have so much debt. Our great-grandchildren are going to be paying it off. It is astonishing that there is anyone alive who is stupid enough to still support that. I mean, I have furniture that would make a better Prime Minister. And while Trump obviously has some deficiencies, my goodness, can you imagine who would be worse than Ardern? I mean, Pol Pot, it's amazing. Go ahead.
Go for it. No, go for it.
Okay. I just wanted to say Socialite is here on YouTube saying, yeah, Socialite, I got my account locked on Twitter. More about that later. But you can tune into Eeryk's channels on Twitter if you want. And then you'll be seeing us in landscape. But yeah, we're going out on his channels and on mine. And I'm in a little bit of a huff with X. So I'm not, for the moment, I'm not broadcasting out on their channels. Go ahead, Eeryk.
Yeah, I mean, well, I've got some reasonably close family members who support the Green Party of all things, so it's quite interesting. When you think about, who could be worse than Ardern? I don't know. Chloe Swarbrick, given the power that she had. So, it'll be interesting to see kind of what sort of power the left wields over the next 10 to 20 years and kind of who's at the front of that. But outside of that, in terms of comments, it's just a lot of chatting between themselves. So I think we're good for now.
Well, I hope you're right. I think that the pendulum is swinging back, and I want to think because the left definitely overextended itself, with so much imposition of social change, trying to change our language, introducing wokery absolutely everywhere, dumbing down education, DEI, this, there, and everywhere. And hopefully the pendulum is swinging back and getting rid of all of it, because they did overextend. But the problem we've got is, their approach is a long march through the institutions, and undoing all of the damage that they did has to be the focus of any incoming government, which kind of brings me on to the first article that I wanted to talk about, which comes to us from the New Zealand Herald, and it's about the sabotage that of our economy by the last Labour regime under Ardern and Chris Hipkins and all of their co-conspirators. You guys will remember that Three Waters was a hugely contentious issue that our media wouldn't talk about, because they were paid. Our media was paid by the Public Interest Journalism Fund to do what the Labour regime under Ardern told them to do. They handed over editorial control. You could not, for 3 or 4 years, get any of the mainstream media in this country to say these words. The first term they could never say was Three Waters, the fact that our water infrastructure was being handed over to ethnic interests. The second word that you could never get them to say was He Puapua, the plan to replace New Zealand's democracy with apartheid. Knowing that they were going out of government, knowing that none of this stuff would progress, what the Labour regime was sabotage the incoming government. They knew that their best chance of getting back in would be to make life as difficult as possible for the government by making sure that the cupboards were bare, and this is an example of it. This guy here, I think John Lamont, I think he's Scottish or he's English, but he was one of the guys that late in the piece was given a role as a CEO, as one of the water entities that everyone knew was going to be disestablished. He took the job knowing he probably wasn't going to have to work on it, and that he would be given a golden parachute when the next government came in, and, as they signalled before he was appointed, disestablished Three Waters and ensured that every New Zealander owns our water infrastructure. The article continues. John Lamont was paid an extra $532,000 to leave his newly created water services job in 2023, making him the best paid of a group of high-profile public sector heads which rolled through policy changes triggered by the last election. Lamont left his job as chief executive of the Auckland Northland Water Services entity in December, with both a redundancy payment of $355,000 with 6 months' salary and a $177,000 payment in lieu of notice. He took up the job early in the same year on February 8th. He left the position on December 15th, just 10 months later. The departure payments were in addition to his $710,000 per year salary. He is a foreigner. He's from the Great Britain. I think he's Scottish. He might be English, but I'm pretty sure he's Scottish, who was working in Australia somewhere. I think he was working in Sydney, and realised that the Ardern regime would offer him a huge amount of money to do a job that was no job, and then he could just skate back overseas, no problem, no harm, no foul. Labour did this everywhere. You think of, I can give you some other examples of the sabotage, the landmines that they left behind for the incoming government to clean up. And a good example is Adrian Orr. Now, as governor of the Reserve Bank, he has been extremely contentious. He lost $9 billion on a bet at one point of our money, as some of his monetary policy has caused huge amounts of issues for everyday New Zealanders. He is one of the reasons that Kiwis cannot have nice things. Before Grant Robertson, remember Grant Robertson was the man with the arts degree that qualified him to be our finance minister and spend $190 billion on pretty much nothing. And also that arts degree, a bachelor level degree, was enough to qualify him to be the vice chancellor of one of New Zealand's major universities, appointed Adrian Orr for another 5-year term. The problem we've got with that is that we are stuck with left-wing incompetent monetary management from the Reserve Bank through that guy. And we have a government that doesn't have the balls to stand up and say, you know what, we are not giving John Lamont a payout. Sue us. He's not getting the money. He's just an apparatchik of the Ardern regime. Adrian Orr, that guy has damaged our economy. Show him the door. What do you mean the Reserve Bank has grown by something like 400 people in 6 years, and they have the most expensive website by far in the public sector in New Zealand for a bank that has one customer? It is just absolutely outrageous. And this is true everywhere. Wherever we look, we see this sort of sabotage. Another example of that, well, hang on, I better go over to Eeryk and see what he reckons about this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just the $710,000 per year salary on its own, it's just ridiculous. I mean, that's like pretty much twice. I mean, the Prime Minister's usually a little over 400k, but I mean, nearly twice what the Prime Minister's making to do literally nothing.
Yeah, it's good money if you can get it right.
What are these people even thinking when they go out and decide, okay, we want to establish a water entity, or we want to implement some water infrastructure changes, some radical changes, and we want to bring them all together in this more centralized way. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to spend as much money as we possibly can for absolutely no reason. We understand what we want to achieve, but we actually think it's more important to spend money than it is to deliver any results. When this is what I don't understand. Why are we spending money because more money makes it look like you're doing more? Is that how they're thinking? Because that's the only way you could comprehend spending $710,000 on that guy before bonuses and stuff and all the other perks. So I don't get it. Is the left actually interested in reform, or are they just interested in making everything worse? Because part of me feels like they're just interested in making everything worse so that they can find themselves in a position to implement their actual agenda. Because otherwise, what are they doing?
Yeah, well, it is actually communist revolutionary theory that eventually there'll be a crisis of capitalism, and a crisis of capitalism is something that they want because they figure that they can rebuild a perfect socialist utopia from the rubble and the ruins of capitalism. And this means that if they can't lose, right? Like every time they waste public money or they invest in something that doesn't work or what have you, from the left's perspective, that is actually a win because it's just hastening the day when capitalism itself fails. But coming back to that figure, that $750,000, you'd agree, is an awful lot of money for someone to not do a job. But how about 750 million? 750 million is a lot more. But that is what Jacinda Ardern spent on road cones in 3 years. Her and Chris Hipkins and all of their co-conspirators flushed money. They didn't want to actually do things like fix potholes. We had roads that were absolutely crumbling. And what happened? They spent $750 million on road cones. This is an article first from the Taxpayers Union that was a little while ago. It was they published this in November, and good on the Taxpayers Union and young Jordan there for being on top of this sort of stuff, because they are really good at pointing out the waste. They write, reacting to a report that shows the New Zealand Transport Agency has spent more than $786 million on road cones and temporary traffic management in the last 3 years. Responding to the outrageous amount of money, TPU Communications Officer Alex Ames said, you cannot be serious. New Zealand has some of the most expensive infrastructure projects in the developed world, yet we've still got an infrastructure deficit as long as your arm. When just shy of 800 million has been blown on traffic cones and lollipop signs, is it any wonder there never seems to be enough money to actually get things built? It begs the question, how many road cones has NZTA ended up buying in the last 3 years? Which contractor was able to grift of this insane amount of money? And that is a question I would like to know too. I would like to know which Labour Party aligned entity, whether it was an iwi corporation, whether it was a trade union, whether it was some Labour Party apparatchik, which companies was it who got $750 million of our money for road cones. This looks like grift and graft, if you ask me. Young Simeon Brown, I think he's a talent coming through in a national party that doesn't have a lot of people with talent, let alone intelligence and integrity. He really does shine out, and so does young Chris along with him, I must say. But he had a statement when this emerged, and I thought that I would read this. I think this came out the same day or the day after. He writes, this is the official statement, which is on the Beehive website. The government has revealed that over the past 3 years, the New Zealand Transport Agency has spent an eye-watering $786 million of taxpayers' money on road cones and temporary traffic management. When I became minister, I was surprised to learn that the NZTA did not know how much taxpayer money had been spent on road cones and TTM, as it wasn't recorded. They didn't record it. How about that for a Labour Party special? $786 million, and no one knows where it went. Sounds like that $1 billion that Andrew Little spent on improving mental health. $1 billion, where did that go? No one knows. Nothing was improved. Same deal. Following the setting of this expectation, NZTA has now confirmed that $786 million has been spent on road cones on state highway maintenance and capital works over the past 3 years. Importantly, this figure does not include expenditure by local councils on local roads. How's that? That is just on things like State Highway 1, State Highway 2. This is not streets. This is intercity roads, and that costs $768 million. God knows how much Labour aligned city councils and local councils spent. Underway to provide public reporting and benchmarking of expenditure for local councils in addition to the reporting made by NZTA. Public reporting is important. Maintaining our road, water and electrical infrastructure is essential. Hard to believe, but we actually need to tell people that. Simeon Brown, the Minister of Infrastructure, actually has to tell us that maintaining our road, water and electrical infrastructure is essential. It is just astonishing that is something that actually does need to be stated. And some level of TTM is unavoidable, he continues, but the current approach is out of control. Excessive use of road cones and temporary speed limit reductions, sometimes left in place when work is completed, simply increases cost, forces people to slow down, and frustrates drivers. As a result of the expectations set by the government, NZTA is responding by implementing a new risk-based approach to how TTM is implemented. Our government is committed to finding efficiencies to deliver better public services while achieving value for money. I agree with much of that, but what I'm disappointed in from young Simeon is that there is no comment in there about holding anyone accountable for this, about holding anyone accountable for why the amount of money was not being recorded. Where did all of the money go? Whose responsibility was it? Who had the delegated financial authority to sign the checks? Is that person still in the job? Are they still grifting money to these people? Why? I believe there should be consequences, and I believe that the firms that were involved should be exposed. Over to you, Eeryk. What do you reckon, mate?
I think it's a classic case of follow the money, and I think that's becoming all too clear when we look at the spending habits of left-wing governments in particular. It seems to just be a habit of the left more so than others, and I think part of that might be because the right, or people, at least neoliberals, tend to be all for reducing costs, not splashing out costs to fund their friends, or at the very least they go about it a different way. So yeah, I think it is a classic case of follow the money, and with respect to the road cones in particular, there is the slight chance it's just because the road cones are ginger kind, and Chris Hipkins wanted to pay it every single road cone at least the minimum wage. So yeah, whether or not that's contributed to the cost, I mean, I think time will tell. Although I suspect the amount it's actually taken out of the publicly funded coffers would suggest that probably isn't a bad call. But I do agree with you on the point of accountability. If no one's held accountable, they're just going to do it again. And so if no one is going to be called out and at least thrown out through the media, even if it's alternative media, if no one's going to kind of investigate and look at, okay, where did the money indeed go? Why was that much needed? And were there any measures that could be taken to reduce the costs? Then we're never going to be able to establish that and learn from it. And if you don't learn from it, well, then you're just going to repeat the same mistakes.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's an object lesson to the to other people who might be considering it. You know, and I believe that there ought to be consequences, and it's a big part. Like, you know, what Donald Trump is doing in the States, we need to do here. Like, you know, there was a DEI admiral who was appointed to the Coast Guard in the US. She wasn't doing the job. She got sacked. You know, here, you know, for us, we're about to give, you know, goodness knows, but we're probably about to give a damehood and a medal to a lesbian who sank a $170 million boat because she couldn't find the autopilot. But enough about consequences. I wanted to turn to some of the comments in the chat. Socialite says, we need a prime minister who has the balls to get rid of the racist co-governance, central and local government. Socialite, I couldn't agree more. You know, Christopher Luxon is absolutely disappointing. The best thing you can say about him, the nicest thing anyone can say about him right now, is that he has lost the room. He is a lame duck prime minister right now. The left don't like him because he's never going to be left-wing enough for them. And the right don't like him because he isn't doing anything like introducing a right-wing antidote to the devastation wrought from far-left extremism by the last government. And the centre don't like him because they can see that he is wishy-washy. Socialite says, what about the $4 million spent on playing Whale Song to Trees? Socialite, yes, and there is going to be some more about that. I think that, you know, there's that is an example of graft, and I would be very strongly, I'd be very, very surprised if the Serious Fraud Office is not looking into that matter as we speak. Simon isn't young, he just looks young. One day suddenly his looks will catch up with his age and he'll have a midlife crisis. Oh, thanks, Socialite, mate. You know, it's I tell you what, it's always good to have you here. And PLJ says, moisturize, baby, moisturize. I don't moisturize, but that's funny. You got any comments from your guys you wanted to address, Eeryk?
Yeah, so Troubled Mind says, some things never change and the most important thing to pay attention to is corrupt government. I've also had PLJ and Socialite over here. PLJ says lost $9 billion or redirected it. I think that's in reference to your little gambling quote about Adrian Orr. Socialite also says, Simon, you're sounding muffled. And so I went and quickly checked for you, at least on my end, to see if it was a difference with my stream and your stream. You sound absolutely fine. So I'm not sure if maybe PRGA is having some issues or Socialite's having some issues with the sound. But I just thought I'd let you know about that, Simon.
Thanks, mate.
One or two complaints about that, but it should be okay. But we also have PLJ saying $786 million would build a factory and make 1 million cones. So I think
is exactly
and it would
right.
be a good job opportunity. Create those jobs.
It would. My understanding is they were renting them. So they were, you know, it was something like one road cone, $5 a day to rent. You know, you can buy it for $20 or you can rent it for 365 days at $5 a pop. You know, it's other things like you think about, like they spent $500 million on stockpiled COVID nasal tests, $500 million in a factory, and they all expired and had to be thrown out. They just flushed money. Just like it was going out of fashion. But look, I think it's probably time for us to go on to the next article, which is one of yours. Hang on a sec, let me bring that up.
Before we do that, I'll quickly just mention a couple of comments before that, and that is quickly that Phil says Trump knows the only DEI policy is stick with family, Don, Eeryk, and Ivanka. And so, and there was one other thing, but we'll leave that. Let's move on.
Okay, all right, guys. If you're enjoying our broadcast, please do like and share it. We've been going for an hour and 10 minutes. We've got about 50 minutes left. I'm going to let Eeryk introduce the next article while I go and get a drink of water because I'm sweating under these lights here. I'll be right back, you guys. Eeryk, over to you.
Sweet, no problem. So yes, the next article, and I saw this come up on X yesterday or the day before, and it was from the Daily Mail, and it's been written by Emily Joshua Stern, health reporter, and basically it's scientists call for more research into COVID vaccine side effects after unexplained spike in heart conditions. Now, I thought this was important because I think seeing a more general media outlets discuss this and bring it up is not only extremely important, but the fact that it's very much consistent with what the primary concerns people held have been for the last few years is, well, it just shows that they can only gaslight you for so long. And this particular issue happens to be quite close to home and personal to me, given my own experience. I'll mix that in here with the article. But just off the top here, says Canadian experts are calling for more research into heart damage linked to COVID vaccines. They fear the scale of the issue remains underdocumented because they say studies have been too narrow and haven't looked at the risk of these injuries months and years after receiving the shot. In rare cases, mRNA shots have been shown to cause myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, and pericarditis, inflammation of the sac-like lining around the heart. The side effect is rare, but exactly how rare is still being debated, and a major 2021 study in Israel put the rate at 1 in 50,000. Other studies have come to vastly different estimates. Now, I would say that 1 in 50,000 is that is a kind of a
Conservative.
Yeah, that very, very conservative, I would say. Thank you for that, because that would mean like 100 people in New Zealand, and that doesn't track. So yeah, 1 in 50,000, very conservative. And the reason I say that is because I'm one of the 1 in 50,000, if that's the case, and I just don't believe that for a second. But researchers from British Columbia warn those studies have been inconsistent in how they classify post-vaccine myocarditis and pericarditis, using different timeframes to define if the conditions were directly linked to the shots. I think this is part of the big issue, is how they've defined it, and that's kind of played a role in the overall numbers and the rarity and kind of narrative spinning about whether or not it was actually a risk. They're calling for further research, noting that rates of the heart conditions, can't spell obviously, globally have increased nearly 40% since the vaccines were rolled out in 2021. Which needed to be explored for public health reasons. But they also concede COVID itself has been shown to cause heart damage, which confuses the issue even more. And what I say to that is, if it's confusing the issue even more, then surely that means you should be looking at it more closely and trying your darndest to actually establish what's causing what, and setting out some pretty clear parameters so you can establish that pretty effectively. They obviously had no interest in doing that, at least until now, and that's why we're in this position where so many years later we're still talking about it. But I think the fact that you can see that nearly 40% increase since 2021 it says a lot, doesn't it? And it probably suggests that that conservative 1 in 50,000 probably isn't true either. They wrote in the medical journal JAMA today, future studies in myocarditis and pericarditis related to COVID-19 vaccination should adopt broader diagnostic criteria, include both conditions as key outcomes, and explore the combined effects of infection and vaccination on cardiovascular health. And I mean, just scrolling down a little bit, you can see Rory Nairn, who was the New Zealander here that died from myocarditis because of the Pfizer jab. And, he's pretty much the only real case in New Zealand that we pretend actually exists, or that we discuss as having actually exists. We pretend that none others have really. And so it's unfortunate that he's the face of the entire vaccine injured in New Zealand, but every other vaccine injured person is for the most part ignored. And so at this point, I want to quickly take a moment to explain. For me, I was first vaccinated in June, July, around, I think the second jab I had was June of 2021. And within a week of that, I was needing medical attention for chest pain that I had no understanding of. And no one ever explained it to me until 6 months later when I got a booster. And then it was at that point that I discovered, okay, shit's really wrong. And from there, everything kind of went downhill, had to resign from employment. I couldn't function properly. I lost some very core quality of life things, which took me several years to get back. And so despite never being officially recorded as a vaccine injury or even having the willingness of the medical professionals to deal with me in a timely fashion and kind of come to firm conclusions through various second opinions and the deduction of looking at the data and my results and all of that, we established that I developed pericarditis and had inflammation of the basically left ventricle. Or at least the sac around the left ventricle, and that caused all of my problems. And so, that has made me very invested in this topic in particular. But do you have anything to say on that firstly before?
Well, I do. Continue? Firstly, if you'll forgive the pun, my heart goes out to you in that. It's just absolutely outrageous that you, as a young man, that you have this consequence to deal with, and it has an effect upon your quality of life, and it may even have an effect on the length of your life. And the question I have for you is about the support and the acknowledgement. I'm interested. The question I'm going to ask is what community groups and advocacy groups are on top of this issue, and what sort of acknowledgement is there from organizations like ACC and the Ministry of Health that yes, something bad happened to you, and that it was caused by this?
As far as the Ministry of Health is concerned, they just basically won't touch me with a 10-foot pole. They just, They literally, at least the people working for them, will come back. They'll look at results that they took from me. They'll tell me these results would typically mean this. However, despite the fact that every single one of your symptoms and the results show this, we're refusing to diagnose you with this, or we're refusing to even consider this. And this is the case of the left ventricular hypertrophy, which is my blood showed inflammation, my ECG showed that the area related to the left ventricle, to establish that, showed that it was irregular, and all of my symptoms I was having were consistent with LVH, and the cardiologist was like, nothing to see here, leave me alone, more or less.
So we've been getting that, right? Like a whole bunch of politicized medicine, like we have politicized science. I know myself that, some of the health issues that I've recently had to deal with, and it seems to me that the health professionals go absolutely out of their way to investigate and attribute to anything but COVID vaccines. All right. So what does the future hold, do you think, for doing what we can for people that are in your circumstance, for holding people accountable for making some of the decisions that did have such a negative impact upon the community, and compensating people?
Us ignoring everything else. I've barely engaged with, groups that are actually working with people in my situation to deal with it, and, and things like that, although I've loosely been in touch with one or two. I can't even recall the names of, because I've just kind of detached myself from everything. And I just think it's important to try and remind people of the data and the studies that are going on about it, and pushing back against some of the false ideas and narratives. So I've played my own little part in that, at least around pushing back against narratives. But for me, myself, I don't know what the future looks like for people in this situation. Certainly not for me, and whether or not any sort of accountability can even be gained. I certainly think that a guilt by an acceptance of a particular pardon, for example, that's probably a little bit of a I don't know, a little bit of a silver lining, I suppose. So we can hold Fauci accountable for that, given the fact that it was necessary for Biden to pardon him in the first place. As for our politicians in New Zealand, I think Ardern's a pariah as it is. I don't really care. Just stay out of the country.
Well, she is now. But as we discussed at the top of the episode, right? There is a huge effort to rehabilitate her reputation. She's got the National Party and the whole establishment on her side, trying to ensure that like that first sham of a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the COVID vaccine behind closed doors with such a narrow terms of reference that political decisions couldn't be analysed, so on and so forth. And good on New Zealand First for actually stepping up and insisting against the National Party's objections to get as much as an open inquiry for the second one as we can possibly expect. But I agree with you. I very much doubt that the guilty will be held to account. But the other thing is that socially, like in terms of a broad social trend, what I'm noticing a lot in the community is a lot of people saying, well, let's just shut the door on that. Okay, yes, there was some human rights abuses. Yes, that young guy holding the puppy got killed. Yes, a whole bunch of young men have got heart conditions, all of that. But look, it was some bad times, and it's some people made some decisions, and maybe the decisions in hindsight were wrong, but let's just kind of move on. And I don't think that's what we should be doing. I think we should be looking, and I think we should be learning from this. And I also think that, once again, there should be consequences. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in this article?
Very quickly, just addressing the whole, while most cases are mild situation. This is the common thing that you'll hear regurgitated about myocarditis and pericarditis. Oh, they're not all severe cases which result in death. Some of them are mild. The thing is, my case was mild, and it dramatically changed my life. So the gaslighting around, it's mild, so we goes into what you were saying, with people saying, oh yes, there was some human rights abuse and all that. It's like, okay, yes, you have to appreciate that this particular issue, at least especially post-vaccination, is predominantly impacting young, healthy men, which means that you're suddenly getting an entire generation of young, healthy men that have been predisposed to a heart condition, which will impact their quality of life forever, and potentially make it so that they are incapable of providing for their families. So and that's in mild cases, and not even the death situations. So yeah, it's disgusting that people would kind of brush it off as if, it's no biggie, it's just like, something that people will deal with, and that was ultimately for the greater good. It's like the greater good would be allowing people to make their own choices, and actually having more healthy people at the end of it by allowing people to make their own choices. And wasn't that what we all wanted? More healthy people, not less.
Yeah, I agree. And Mark David agrees with you in the chat, who notes, no jab, no job, what a joke, and be kinder. Yeah, exactly right. And that's what happened, and I think that's the case, Eeryk. You've got to remember that for all of the leftists, which is about 50% of the New Zealand population, people like you who've been harmed are politically inconvenient, right? So you're always going to struggle to get anything like recognition, acknowledgement, and actually reasonable healthcare. Because how can your health be how can a problem with your health be fixed if the medical profession refuses to adequately diagnose it? Yeah, all right. Well, look, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. Time flies, mate, eh?
Well, we started at 8:30, so.
Oh, we did too. Oh, goodness. Oh, yeah, I'm behind time. Yeah, I thought we were half an hour ahead. Oh, right. Oh, well, that's good. Well, we've got plenty of time left to go. Have you got you got any comments in your chats you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, we've got a couple here. Shelley says that she was diagnosed in 2014 with advanced heart failure, and then they gave her a jab, and within hours was on the floor. And so I think that's a classic example of if someone's got a long-standing heart condition, and you know a certain medication or treatment is going to potentially cause issues there, why are we just saying, okay, it's going in your arm? That's the sort of stuff that just wasn't considered, and that certainly needs to be factored into those that expanded terms of reference in the Royal Commission, which I believe it is all going to be. It is all part of it, but that's the sort of thing that just needs to stop. And I think Phil agrees there, and says, "Let's stop pushing shit," like Shelley was saying. And Troubled Mind says, not only all that, but it also wiped out a lot of old timers. So the full tinfoil hat takers trim off the oldies, cripple the new generation by and large. Socialite says, reputable immunologists such as Professor Emeritus Robert Clancy have said that the worst possible time to try immunize a population against a novel virus is during and while the virus is spreading rapidly in the population. I'm sure he's probably right, to be fair, but I wouldn't know. Surprisingly, haven't heard of that professor either.
And I'm really sad to hear Shelley's health condition. Shelley's a good friend of the show, and we always enjoy her company and want the best for her. She is one of our favourite people. All right, should we move on to the next article?
Yep, sure thing.
Sweet as. Okay, I think it's my one's next, and this comes to us from Corey Doctorow. Corey Doctorow is a really thoughtful technology commentator, and I've been following him for years. Not seriously, but I always enjoy reading his articles. And he wrote an article which is really, really topical for people like me. Like, a lot of people don't know that that my professional background is as an enterprise architect. It's an esoteric field inside technology. I spend some of my time working as an enterprise architect, and then I take on roles as a solution architect, which is a little bit more specific and focused on delivering discrete pieces of work. But the other thing about me is that I'm very much someone who believes in the philosophies of the open source and free software movements. And this also touches on a thing called open protocols. Like, people think of open code, that's great, but open protocols are important too. Now, the way that people like me think things should work is that things should be open and compatible. What you do is you have protocols so that anyone can build software, and if they comply with the standard of the protocol, it can communicate with any other piece of software. A good example of this is email, right? It doesn't matter if you're using Thunderbird or Microsoft Outlook or a web-based client or whatever. Anyone else who you want to swap email with, they can use whatever application they like. And because you are both using a compatible protocol, it gives everyone the flexibility to use the tools that are most appropriate to them and interoperate with everyone else. The other great thing is that it's a social leveler, right? Like, one of the problems that we have at the moment is that rather than having an open internet, it is insular, all of these walled gardens. Technologies like, for instance, X are deliberately incompatible with other social media platforms, and because of that, they become these walled gardens where the proprietary owners of those technologies exert an awful lot of control. People like me don't think that is how things should work and try to resist it. The issue is, of course, is that most people don't really care, and so the audiences are much larger inside those walled gardens rather than out in the open internet. And some of the reasons for this are explored in a wonderful article here from Mr. Doctor, and I thought you'd go through it. And he came up with a wonderful term for it, for the social media platforms, which is called enshittification, and it really resonated with me. Let me read you a bit of it. Enshittification isn't caused by venture capitalists. He wrote this last week. Many of us have left the big social media platforms. Far more of us wish we could leave them. And even those of us who've escaped from Facebook, Insta, and Twitter still spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get the people we care about off them. 2, It's lazy and easy to think that our friends who are stuck on legacy platforms run by Zuckerberg and Musk lack the self-discipline to wean themselves off of these services, or lack the perspective to understand why it's so urgent to get away from them, or that their hack dopamine loops have addicted them to Zucker-Musk algorithms. But if you actually listen to the people who've stayed behind, you'll learn that the main reason our friends stay on legacy media platforms is that they care about the other people there more than they hate Zuck or Musk. And that's true, right? Effectively, what these walled gardens are doing is profiting from interpersonal relationships between their users, and they make it attractive by making it easy to use. And that's one of the big problems with open social media, is that often they are not quite as user friendly, or that they don't have enough of a user base to gain critical mass. The article continues, they rely on them because they're in a rare disease support group, or they all coordinate their kids' Little League carpools together, or that's where they stay in touch with family and friends they left behind when they emigrated, or their customers, or the audience for creative labor. All those people might want to leave too, but it's really hard to agree on where to go, when to go, and how to establish your groups when you get somewhere else. Economists call this the collective action problem. This problem creates switching costs. A lot of stuff you'll have to live without if you switch from legacy platforms to new ones. The collective action problem is hard to solve, and the switching costs are very high. Eeryk, have you ever used one of the alternative social media platforms?
What, like, such as like Blue Sky and all that?
Yeah, something like that.
So I went on Blue Sky when it first dropped to troll a few libs, but that's about it. And obviously there is, what was it? It was like a right wing Twitter alternative a couple years ago, which kind of died out pretty quickly. I kind of
Gab.
No, that was one, but it was another one that was, I forget what it's called now. That's how irrelevant it is. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have much interest, primarily because in New Zealand, I think is more of the reason. There's not enough people from New Zealand that go over to those sort of sites. And so you just don't get enough engagement, and for it to, to be worth your time at all anyway, you don't really find anything out. And so unless you want to sit there and just engage with the US or some other foreign nation's politics all day, there's no real point in being on those sites at all, I find, especially with platforms like Blue Sky and Mastodon. It's just censorship heaven. So, I mean, why even bother if you've got opposing views anyway? And that's why I find it interesting that I did read this, and it was quite lengthy, wasn't it? And one makes reference to them being very credible threats to the likes of Twitter and Facebook. Blue Sky and Mastodon, that is. I found that rather hilarious because maybe Facebook, but certainly not X.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I take a different view.
Really?
The thing is, there's this whole area of social media. It's called the Fediverse, and the idea is that things are independent but compatible. And the problem is that there's a protocol behind it. It's a thing called ActivityPub. Now, the problem with ActivityPub is it tried too much to be all things to all people. And the fact of the matter is that different applications have a different approach. They have a different focus to do different things. So, for instance, Mastodon is like Twitter. It's a microblogging site, right? Whereas PeerTube is like a peer-to-peer YouTube equivalent for sharing video content. So how you get those applications, which are very, very different in focus, to be able to actually be compatible with one another in a sensible sort of a way is quite difficult to do. Now, here's the state of the state of play. The reason people go to Blue Sky is it doesn't use ActivityPub. ActivityPub, Blue Sky or Blue Hair Sky, as I like to call it, is really just another walled garden with heavy moderation, and it's attractive to leftists and pedophiles because It's it's a site which moderates for their type of tastes and content. Mastodon is very, very different. It is absolutely open. And if for some reason you're attached to a server that has moderation policies that you don't like for some reason, you can just switch to another server that doesn't have those policies, or you can stand one up yourself. This is very, very enabling for the users. No one gets to tell you what you can see inside the ActivityPub universe. You can, if anyone does do that, like, you could, because some people see it as a service. It's like, okay, I'll go on the main site for Mastodon, mastodon.social, and I know that they put a lot of effort into ensuring there isn't objectionable content on it. That suits my tastes and preferences. That's what I want to do. However, there'll be other people who say, no, I don't like it. Mastodon.social allows too many left-wing voices, not enough right-wing voices. So I'm going to go to Donald Trump's platform. Donald Trump's Truth Social runs ActivityPub. It is based on Mastodon and is compatible with it. I can communicate with my Mastodon account to anyone who is using Truth Social Trump's network because they are interoperable. There's a bunch of other tech in this regard. One of them that I use and that I really, really rate is a technology called Nextcloud. Nextcloud is sort of like an alternative to Google and Dropbox and all that sort of stuff. It provides everything from calendar synchronization to GPS tracking, a whole bunch of different things, all right? And another example I'll bring up now, if I can find it, is, here it is. Yeah. This is another part of the Fediverse that I have just installed and started using. This is called Owncast, and what it is it's like all the other like guys right now, we are going out to 7 or 8 different social media platforms. We're going out to Eeryk's channels on X and YouTube. We're going out to my channels on YouTube and Instagram and Rumble and Twitch, but we're also going out to Owncast. Now, here's the thing. With this Owncast site, it's live.simontv.org. Anyone can go there and connect to this and watch the episode. It means that you can connect to this without watching, without having to connect to a social media platform, right? Which is pretty cool. The other thing is that underneath that is the Fediverse. So right now, anyone who's got a Mastodon account, a PeerTube account, a NextHub account, or a plethora of different applications inside the Fediverse can connect to this server, watch it, and use their credentials to log in and do whatever they want to do. This and the advantage that I see in this approach to doing things is that it's not an either or situation. People can embrace open technologies and the Fediverse just by running more than one account, and most people do, right? Already. Most people have a Facebook account so that they stay in touch with their probably their family members that are a little bit older, for example, and then they might have an X account, which is their day-to-day. They've got a YouTube account and so on and so forth. You can add the Fediverse into that mix. And the other thing is that you made a point about user base, and you're right that most of the Fediverse has quite a small user base, but that has changed. When it comes to ActivityPub, as I said, Blue Hair Sky doesn't use it, which means it's incompatible, although there are efforts to try and make it compatible with ActivityPub, which are destined to failure. Another organization 10 years ago called Diaspora tried to make a Facebook alternative that also didn't use ActivityPub, and that died because it simply didn't ever get enough traction. Now, here's the thing. Threads, the Facebook Instagram Threads, which is Meta, Facebook's Twitter alternative, uses ActivityPub. So here's the thing. There are 180 million Threads users, which is a significant enough user base, I think, to gain enough traction, who are instantly compatible with everyone who is using Mastodon and, by extension, technologies like this. So, for example, anyone who is following me on any of the Fediverse servers, whether it's Nextcloud or PeerTube or Hubzilla or what have you, as soon as I started this broadcast, they got a notification, and from within their client, they can just log in and bang, they can watch the Eeryk and Simon show. I think that that is pretty cool. And for someone like me who has pretty much half by choice, half by having a bit of a grump with Twitter, spent some time a little bit more productively building up an alternative. I think it is worth looking at, and it's worth investing some time in, because I think society-wise, the control of the walled gardens over the conversations that people have needs to be avoided if possible. Free speech above all things.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Simon, I knew nothing about any of that stuff. That was very informative, and I'm sure most of the people watching probably in the same boat, to be fair.
I don't talk about technology very often, but there are societal consequences to a whole bunch of the stuff. And from time to time, it's not. I know I don't talk about technology very much because most people find it boring, but sometimes I do want to just introduce this, and I'll be talking about it more on Simon TV and probably with you. All right, turning to the chat. Socialite says, I covered that. The whole white blood clot thing is very concerning. Yeah, it absolutely is. Mark David said, Big Brother seems to be everywhere. Is he, Mark David? He absolutely is. If you're using any sort of tech, he is absolutely watching you. All right, guys. So we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes, Eeryk. It's probably time for another article. What do you reckon?
Yeah, certainly. But before that, I'll quickly get onto a couple of comments because they are coming in thick and fast today, which is a nice change. So quickly, Troubled Mind says, open source is the future, not esoteric, Simon. You're a futurist. Socialite says, you'll enjoy hearing Dr. John Campbell and Professor Robert Clancy talking on John Campbell's YouTube channel about the body's immune system. Hugely informative, very easy to understand what they're saying, and so forth. I have seen a couple of things from John Campbell. He is pretty informative, and I'm sure his guests are likewise. Then PLJ says Mastodon is leftist mainly, but I suppose the merits that you're discussing about Mastodon is not necessarily who the user base is, but rather everything behind it and how it functions, and its how it can be applied. So that's interesting to hear. PLJ also says needs venture capital to fuse the features together into an everything app that when the wokeness slips in pleasing the bonkers bankers. Okay, whatever. Shortland Chambers says, I loved the Microsoft chat rooms from the 90s. Heaps of chicks there. And I wouldn't know, to be honest. And Socialite says, if you have concerns about the toxicity of the COVID-19 vaccines, or indeed any mRNA vaccine, you will want to hear John Campbell talking, etc., etc. And that'll do on my end. So yes, another article. It's my turn, I guess, isn't it?
It is, but just before we go there, PvP, no need to apologize. I could see what you meant. Did I use Google Plus and YouTube when they were all linked up? PvP, I did, but I didn't. I could see that that Google Plus was destined to failure, just like Diaspora and all that sort of stuff. They were just too late to the market. All right, turning to the next article. This comes to us from The Guardian. I don't know what Eeryk is doing reading all of this left-wing media sources. This is the second one tonight, but here we go. This is from the Manchester Guardian.
The rationale is they're more funny to read. So that's what it is. I like disagreeing, so it makes it easier. So bill to reinterpret founding treaty with Maori would make New Zealand a laughing stock, is what the MPs are told. Introduced to, actually, who wrote this? I can't even see that. Eva Corlett, who's based in Wellington. Introduced to Parliament by a minor coalition party, the Treaty Principles Bill seeks to abandon a set of principles that guide the relationship between Māori and ruling authorities. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up this week is purely because we're at the oral submission stage of the treaty bill situation, and it's probably going to be the last hurrah before it eventually gets voted down, and then we find ourselves in a position where there'll either be a strong kind of lobby group pushed or push for a citizens trigger a referendum. Otherwise, we won't get one at all. So that's why I wanted to bring it up, but also because I like how they like to frame and word this whole narrative. So a marathon public hearing into a bill that seeks to radically reinterpret New Zealand's founding document or treaty between Māori tribes and the British Crown began on Monday amid widespread outcry that proposed changes are unconstitutional, socially divisive, and an attack on Māori rights. The Treaty Principles Bill, which was introduced to Parliament by the minor coalition ACT Party, seeks to abandon a set of well-established principles that guide the relationship between Māori and ruling authorities in favour of its own redefined principles. The ACT Party argues that Māori have been afforded different political and legal rights and privileges compared with the non-Māori because of principles that have flowed from the Treaty of Waitangi, New Zealand's founding document that is instrumental in upholding Māori rights. The proposal has sparked strident criticism from lawyers, academics, and public who believe ACT's principles will weaken Māori rights and remove checks on the Crown. It has prompted mass meetings of Māori leaders and the largest ever protest on Māori rights. Sir Edward Jury, a former High Court judge who helped establish the Waitangi Tribunal, an institution set up to investigate breaches of the treaty, told the committee the bill erased 50 years of the tribunal's work to help develop the principles. Now, he says it will erase 50 years of the tribunal's work to help develop the principles. I certainly bloody hope so. That's the whole idea, because we don't want what the what the tribunal has done to be what we base pretty much every piece of legislation that we put forward to try and comply with, because that's how they like to utilize it. They like to utilize the principles and essentially the control they have of what the principles are, what they say, and how they've dramatically changed them over the last 50 years, so that they can dramatically influence or at least put pressure on political policy that they disagree with and legislation being proposed, as well as control the outcomes of any treaty settlement claim that has come about. It's as simple as this. An iwi brings a claim forward. The tribunal will look at the principles, amend said principles, or just utilise which principles they think are relevant to get the desired outcome that they think is most fitting for their ideological narrative. That is how they use the principles, and as long as they wield that control, our entire democracy is pretty much in the palm of their hands to meddle with, or at least apply a lot of pressure to, and that's why you've got the piss-weak National Party who refuse to do anything, pretty much refuse to do anything that the Waitangi Tribunal says, oh, the principals don't like it. And fundamentally, that's why they disagree with the Treaty Principles Bill. What do you think about that so far, Simon?
Yeah, I do. And the other thing is I'd take issue with the framing, which is just absolutely ridiculous. This Wokington woman says, seeks to abandon a set of well-established principles that guide the relationships between Maori and ruling authorities in favour of its own redefined principles. Well, we hear the leftists saying this. Can they ever state these principles? Well-established principles, she says. No. As you say, they are absolutely fluid. All of these principles are just absolute. They get made up on the fly to do whatever the Waitangi Tribunal decides it wants to do. And it's absolutely extrajudicial, and it is fluid, and it's not well defined. I would challenge this Wokington excuse for a journalist. Let's not call her a journalist. Let's call her what she is, which is a regime stenographer, to actually state what these well-established principles that guide the relationship are. Give us an enumerated list of the principles, right? Yep. We never see them because they just don't exist.
Yeah, I remember a few months ago I went and tried my hardest to find them, and I did find a good chunk, but in doing so I also established that they are indeed fluid. They have indeed changed with time, and they change at the drop of a hat, and that they are picked and chosen by the tribunal of the day to fit their needs. And what they often do is, if you ask them what the principles are, they'll just reference the 3 Ps, which is participation, partnership, and protection. 3 completely made up things. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. It's the cover for what it really is, which is indeed a long list of malleable interpretations of a treaty that don't actually reference the treaty at all. And if you try to put them into or insert them into the treaty anyway, it would be completely contradictory to what the treaty says. And so that is fundamentally why they're sitting here bitching and saying you'll erase 50 years of the tribunal's work. Yeah, 50 years of fiction of your own invention, purely ideological garbage that you're using to try and control the political order, the legislation, and the direction of the country. You've got no basis for it, and them sitting there and calling it unconstitutional is just, as seems to be a theme tonight, it's the height of hypocrisy.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's epitomized by other recent appointments. Like, the left is absolutely incandescent with rage that some of the appointments to the Waitangi Tribunal are not Maori activists. That enrages them that there are other people involved in the conversation. They've taken particular issue with Philip Crump and with Ron Mark. You'll recall Ron Mark was Minister of Defence. He was a New Zealand First politician. He is of Maori extraction himself. His daughter is heavily involved in the Maori economy and in the public sector, but he is not Maori enough. And from the perspective of the activists and the leftists to serve on the Waitangi Tribunal. And it really does come back to their cancel culture, right? What the Waitangi Tribunal thinks of itself is as being superior to Parliament. They believe that they can tell Parliament what to do. They are not a court, and they are just, all they can do is advise, and they have very much exceeded their authority, and they do need to be reined in. And even if that was not the case, it is unreasonable for these activists to screech and try to impose their cancel culture approach to silencing people who have skills that can contribute to the operation of that and maybe remediating what is going wrong there. Yeah, no, completely agree. But continuing with the bill, not the bill, the article. So Edward Jury says that if the bill were to be passed, our government would be the laughingstock of the Western world, who understand how responsible states today seek to manage relationships with the Indigenous people. Former National Party Treaty Negotiations Minister Christopher Finlayson told the Parliamentary Committee the bill was misconceived. Well, I would argue nowadays that Chris Finlayson, on reflection, is just not a good example of a National Party minister of the last 15 years. And many of the problems that we've had are caused by him. And of course, he has had a very, very lucrative career utilising the relationships that he built as the Treaty Minister Bill. And don't forget that, you know, the objective of the key government was to complete all of it and put it behind us and say, right, that's it, done, now let's move on as a society. So they gave Chris Finlayson a huge latitude to go and do that. And of course he didn't. All he did was just flush money on more made up historical nonsense for unending claims. And now in later life, now that he is no longer the minister, he has a very, very lucrative career advising iwi on their claims.
Honestly, I feel like at this point you could have put him in charge of writing He Puapua and it would have come back looking exactly the same. That's how much I listened to the guy speak on the issue, and I'm like, how were you minister on this issue, and how was it somehow not the dumpster fire it was in the Ardern era under you? It's mind-boggling. I can't take the guy seriously, but that is what it is. So it continues saying it endeavours to raise a number of principles that simply do not reflect the relationship between the Crown and tangata whenua, he said. And this is what I mean. It's like, he just bought into the whole it's opposite day thing that the left does these days, which is whatever we say is the bad thing happening, we're not doing it all. It's all them. It's all in reverse. I mean, the proposed principles by the ACT Party are far more consistent with the treaty than anything that the Waitangi Tribunal references and has created over the last 50 years. Far more consistent. In fact, you could argue it's so consistent, it's almost impossible to argue there's any real inaccuracy or difference in meaning between the principles proposed and the articles of the treaty itself. And so, yeah, I mean, how can you look at anyone and think that they have any integrity or any credibility when they can say something that's so easily proven to be a lie?
Have you ever seen Chris Finlayson in the flesh?
Not in the flesh, no.
No, okay, all right. Well, he looks like every kid whose head I flushed in a toilet when I was at high school.
Are we sure you were the one putting the heads in the toilet?
Yeah. The other thing I'll say is that did you happen to catch Elliot Akale's submission to the Treaty Principles Bill to the Select Committee yesterday or the day before?
I didn't actually watch it, no.
Okay,
but
well,
I see the odd thing from him.
Okay, well, it's worth watching in full. But he made the point that they have some issues with principle number 2 as ACT has defined it. Now, the reason is that got changed to include because it was like equal rights for all. But around the cabinet table, National pushed and ACT caved to introducing a clause to that said rights for hapu and iwi as they were in 1840. So there's an implicit inequality as ACT is defining that second principle that Elliott and Hobson's pledge, in my opinion, were very right to take issue with. So while in general what David Seymour is trying to achieve here is certainly improvement on what we've got with these amorphous treaty principles that just get defined on the fly, it is an improvement, but it is not perfect, because what we need is equality defined constitutionally, and that is the objective I think that every New Zealander should be seeking from this process.
Yeah, it is a difficult one, but I would note, and I've addressed this in my own time, is it states that, but also anything related to that. So you look at that specific change in the clause, and you would think, okay, it opens the door for treating people differently. However, it also references that it also can't basically conflict with any of the other two principles and the idea of equality. And so it means that any application or interpretation of it in a court and so forth cannot go against the whole idea of equal treatment. And I think what actually is interesting here is that Hobson's pledge has done the kind of uno reverse of me on this issue, or the opposite of me. So whereas when it was first proposed, I took issue with the second principle and understood that it needed to be amended to better reflect what the actual second article says, Hobson's pledge, nothing. Now that he's changed it to be more in alignment with what I think it should say, Hobson's pledge very much the opposite. So I think Hobson's pledge is taking a principled approach, which I agree with, that it needs to 100% uphold equality. However, the wording is more consistent with the actual article which they're trying to pass it off as. And if it doesn't more accurately reflect Article 2, which it now does, then it's open to extreme criticism and valid criticism. What he's actually done by kind of accepting National's compromise is actually shut down any credible resistance to the proposed principles, and as such meant that anyone actually opposing it has no basis at all, and that's why I think it's actually a masterstroke, but it's ultimately not going to make a difference in terms of being passed through Parliament, so whatever.
What I think is really fascinating is you're seeing the media narrative, right? The media narrative is all about promoting apartheid, and we're seeing it from this Wokington regime stenographer writing for the Manchester Guardian. What we often hear the media doing is confronting government politicians with the divisive bill. What I notice the media never says to any of the people that are showing up and bitterly opposing it at the Select Committee, or any of the far left extremist politicians that are against this bill, the likes of Chris Hipkins or Chloe Swarbrick, you will never hear the media confront them with this question: what don't you like about equality? What is it about enshrining equality amongst people in our constitutional arrangements that you don't like? That question is never asked. And the reason is that we have a left-wing media establishment, which is part of the broader establishment, which just totally wants apartheid and racial segregation in all things, because that is what all of the people that they eat avocado toast with prior to spin class think should happen in society. And it's another example of just how we don't ever have anything like balance in our media. And David Seymour was right to call this out with there's the woman from TVNZ with the chin tattoos who just absolutely framed the interview along those lines. And he was right to say, look, you're painting this in the wrong in an unfair light, and you are not being anything like balanced in your coverage. When are you going to do that? And what I would ask is why is it that no one is saying to Chris Hipkins, what don't you like about equality?
Yeah, and I think that it's all about trying to ensure that when you are placed in a position where they're attempting to control the narrative, that you do try and take control of that narrative back. And we don't see enough of that from our politicians, and I think that's part of the reason why our centre-right parties in particular are in such a pickle, is because they haven't taken enough of the opportunity to to push back. And I think if any party has done that, and they've done it effectively in the last 12 months, probably 24 months, it's been New Zealand First and also ACT to a degree. But I don't think ACT has had enough. I don't think they've had the cut through in their attempts, and so they probably don't do it as much or as bluntly as they should. But I mean, David Seymour at least has maintained a very clear position on the matter, and that's what he even said in his own public hearing on Monday. And he's like, dividing people into racial groups is the definition of racism, adding it was putting New Zealand on the path towards totalitarianism. And it really is as straightforward as that. That's what we find ourselves in. You either oppose the bill for a reason that's somewhat understandable, like New Zealand First, or you simply support the idea of dividing people into racial groups. and it for me, I can't comprehend the idea that every single person that is just fully in support of that whole dividing people into racial groups thing even understands that that's what they're supporting. It doesn't to me I cannot comprehend it, how half the country can genuinely believe that the Labour Party, Green Party, Te Pāti Māori position on this is the just, equal and fair one. It doesn't, either they are that ideologically they're that ideologically controlled that they can't understand what it is they're supporting, or we seriously just have a lot of very, very fallen people in this country who just simply don't care about others anymore, or don't care about equal treatment anymore, and they're driven purely by the goal of inequities and getting rid of inequities. It's obviously all a very ideologically driven position, but I don't understand how that many people can truly buy into it, because it's just so incomprehensible.
Well, most people are stupid, and which Socialite notes in the chat here. Socialite says, you need to make this style of broadcast your normal broadcast, much more interesting with the two of you, and no doof. All right, which is a pretty harsh criticism, you'd have to say, of Simon TV. Socialite also asked, can you see the chat on Eeryk's side? No, I can't. This is an issue that we haven't yet solved, is that Eeryk can see the chat. We're not quite sure how to bring it into the broadcast. It's sort of like we can have one or the other, and so that's a bit of a problem. Kiwis Can Fly is here, which is fantastic. I haven't seen that young man for a little while, or watched any of his videos, probably because I'm not on X. Eeryk, you got some comments you want to address?
Yeah, we got a couple here. So Socialite says Finlayson, like many ministers, was compromised and misled by the people working in his ministry. Given how many absolute nutcases work in the public sector, it probably isn't surprising that would happen. Socialite also says, don't trust anything that any National Party MP says regarding the principles of the treaty, especially if they defend the existence of said principles. You cannot find any principles described in the actual Treaty of Waitangi. Socialite also says, very busy, I agree with Winston Peters, there are no principles in the Treaty of Waitangi, and all references to the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi should be entirely removed from NZ law. Shelley the Kiwi says they're setting up for thousands to come to Waitangi next week. Eddie Jury, which is the guy I was quoting in the article, was apparently married to Donna Hall, an activist lawyer. We've got a few more here. Shelley the Kiwi says bendy legislation is easier to manipulate when they want. That's very true, and that's why they want it as it is. When it's all malleable, allows them to bend it to their will. Shelley also says, I live in Waitangi, brought up here, and never were we raised to see anyone different. A lot of kaumatua are embarrassed. In the 70s, we were kept inside Waitangi Day unless you were doing kabahaka or waka ama, because the naughty Māori from down south were coming to town. Might have to bring it back. Don't disagree, to be fair. Don't want all them South Aucklanders coming in and ruining the area. A few other good points, all appreciated, but yeah, I think that's about that on this end.
Oh, okay. PLJ is saying there's no audio coming through on YouTube. Really, mate? That seems odd. Or on Rumble. All right, I'll have to have a look at that afterwards. Can anyone else confirm that PLJ is talking probably about my channels on YouTube and Rumble? But I'd be surprised. It should both be working. Eeryk, I'm just going to step away for a moment. Is there something you wanted to talk about while I'm gone? I've gone for about a minute, or should we play some music for a bit?
Yeah, I can just address a couple more points and go over if you like. It's
all
fine.
Right, I'll be right back.
Yeah, no problem. So Socialite says, bingo, the racists and identitarians are not at all interested in equality of opportunity. They want their woke cult of intersectional equity of outcome imposed onto everyone. No, thank you. Phil says he has YouTube audio on Simon TV. Yeah, I'm quickly trying to check on my end, guys. Yeah, audio is working fine on my end as well. And obviously everything like we kind of do, I'll give you a quick rundown of how we do it. So Simon's got his kind of methodology of streaming, and I essentially just give him the relevant stream keys, and I just load straight in, so it all kind of goes through his end. I just have to activate it a little bit myself for X, but it's all pretty seamless. It's quite impressive, and I always enjoy listening to Simon discuss technology and that sort of stuff, because he's very well informed relative to myself. In fact, I had an uncle who was kind of in a similar area, who passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but it was he was always very onto it with this technology stuff. I'm just gassing up your technology brain, Simon. So, but yeah, I checked the sound on my end as well. Phil says the sound's all good for him on YouTube. It's all good for me on YouTube too. So, not sure what's going on there for some people.
Okay, yeah, I have had some issues with Rumble in the past. Yeah, but guys, it is actually quite seamless. Like, you know, when you think that we're going out to a huge number of social media platforms, and okay, you know, the chat is, we haven't integrated that yet. Eeryk, we got to do that, man, for the next one. Work out how we can get that to work. What I'm thinking is, like, what people can see on screen is the chats that come through to me behind me, and it would be good to put the chats that are addressed to you on your channels behind you, so we can kind of, you know, do that. So I think that's the only way we can probably integrate it. Okay. PLJ says only Rumble is dead. Okay. All right. Can anyone else who's on Rumble confirm that the audio is not coming through? Because that'd be I can't tell after the broadcast because the audio is already there.
Troubled Mind says no audio on Rumble for him. But also Shelley says she just noticed I have lovely blue eyes. So that's very nice of you. I've had that my whole life, don't worry. The hair less so. It used to be very light, blonde and fluffy. Not anymore. No one cares about my hair anymore. Just the eyes. Thanks, Shelley.
All right. Okay, should we move on to another article?
Yep. Go.
All right, guys. I'm going to do a little bit more technology again. Socialite says not a criticism of Simon TV. No, it's fair enough to criticize Simon TV. With the two of you, the pace of the discussion is faster. The music isn't the thing I look forward to. Yeah, the thing is, that's the thing with Simon TV, right? Like, you know, because it's just me, and I'm having to do all of the production as well as the presenting, the music, even though it's my taste in music, the music and the visuals is effectively filler, which allows me to do other bits and pieces like read the chat or set up the next thing I want to talk about or something like that. And the great thing about, you know, having Eeryk and I doing this is I don't need the filler because I can do those sorts of things when Eeryk is talking. So you're right, it's a pretty good format. And the other thing is the two of us really, really enjoy it. And Kiwis Can Fly confirms that there's no audio on Rumble. Okay, I'm really sorry about that, guys. I don't know what causes that, but sometimes Rumble, for some reason, the audio just does not come through, but it's always there in the recording afterwards. Okay, huge news yesterday was more than $1 trillion was wiped off of tech stocks led by NVIDIA. Now, NVIDIA is the largest manufacturer of GPUs, graphical processing units.
Thank you very much.
What's that?
Sorry. I was just saying thank you to NVIDIA.
Thank you to NVIDIA. Yeah. So inside your computer, you have a CPU, the central processing unit, which does a whole bunch of the core computing. But you also have a GPU, which nominally is to do the graphical processing. But it also has, because it has a different architecture, it's also very, very good for doing very, very sorts of specific jobs that are very relevant to things like large language models. Large language models is what people are calling AI. It's a misnomer because it's not AI, it is large language models. Now, here's the thing. Because NVIDIA has a technology advantage and America wants to dominate in the field of AI, they have imposed export restrictions upon high-end NVIDIA gear into the People's Republic of China. The idea is by limiting the amount of high-end processing power that the Chinese have available to them, that America can maintain its lead in the field of AI with technologies like ChatGPT from OpenAI, from Meta spending another $85 billion this year on their research on Grok with X, and so on and so forth, right? But what happened was that a Chinese company using older, NVIDIA tech released an AI model which is comparable. Okay, now this put the shits up the market because suddenly, out of nowhere, a Chinese company with limited resources was able to produce astonishing results. And I'll bring up an article which discusses this. This comes to us from the Telegraph and Matthew Field. The tech is called DeepSeek, the Chinese AI that has sparked a $1 trillion panic. Have there been human rights abuses in Xinjiang, asks ChatGPT, the artificial intelligence chatbot, and you'll receive an unambiguous yes. Put the same question to DeepSeek, a Chinese chatbot, and the answer is very different. Allegations of human rights abuses are unfounded and politically motivated, it says. Its response is not unusual. Chatbots are heavily muzzled in China, where AI companies are required to instill the socialist values of the Communist Party and are regularly tested by Beijing's censors. But DeepSeek is now ringing alarm bells in the West as it breaks out of China and threatens to challenge America's AI giants across the rest of the world. Don't you think this is interesting? Chatbots are heavily muzzled in China, where AI companies are required to instill the socialist values of the Communist Party. This got picked up here in New Zealand by young Cam Slater. I saw he published an article this morning that I thought was really, really interesting. This comes to us from the Good Oil blog, and Cam Slater wrote this himself. I had a chat to him earlier this morning. I said, oh, look, I was scheduled to talk about AI. I saw you wrote this article. Do you mind if I bring it up? And he said it was that I could go for it. So here is Cam's article. He writes, do you trust Chinese AI? I don't, and here's why. Dodgy is as dodgy does. The new Chinese AI is dangerous. Don't use it. He writes, there has been carnage in tech stocks. There was, after a Chinese AI company released DeepSeek as an alternative and low-cost alternative to other AI software like ChatGPT and Gemini from Google. We'll come back to Gemini in a minute. And he goes into to describe it. Here's the problem. Any company that is Chinese owned and operated is effectively part of the CCP apparatus, meaning the Chinese Communist Party. Do you trust them to deliver honest results? I don't. Look, sure, ChatGPT is biased along with the other woke AI systems, perhaps with the exception of Grok from X. But this Chinese AI just outright lies and then gaslights you about it. And he actually goes in and describes a situation where he was asking it questions. It would give an answer where it was said, I think the question that he asked was, who killed the most people? And in the top 10, yes, here's his question, the list of people who killed more people than anyone else. And it provided an answer. And in that list is number one, Mao Zedong, who was, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Genghis Khan, la. But then it disappeared. Then in real time, he writes, right before my eyes, it deleted the entire answer. Clearly, it was unhelpful that Mao Zedong and Genghis Khan were listed in the top 10 list of killers. So he's going through it. But what I think is interesting about that technically is it looks to me that sort of filtering was applied after the AI did the answer. It's like it was, rather than the AI making a mistake, the AI produced the answer, and then a filtering software on top of it, Great Wall of China style, took that answer away. So that is really, really interesting that the Chinese government's filtering software, in my opinion, most likely is post facto applying the filters after it has answered, rather than applying it, rather than having a back end control inside the code to stop it producing the answer in the first place. But coming back to what Cam said here, where is it? Sure, ChatGPT is biased along with other woke AI systems, perhaps with the exception of Grok. I disagree, Cam. And you guys might remember this with with Gemini, which is Google's AI version. And this article comes to us from the deeply Soviet BBC in the United Kingdom. And it's from about a year ago, February 2024, why Google's woke AI problem won't be an easy fix. In the last few days, Google's artificial intelligence tool has had what it is best described as an absolute kicking online. Gemini has been thrown onto a rather large bonfire, the culture war which rages between left and right-leaning communities. A viral post showed this recently launched AI image creating an image of the US founding fathers, which inaccurately included a black man. Gemini also generated German soldiers from World War II, incorrectly featuring a black man and an Asian woman. Guys, I don't know if you remember it, but Google's large language model, Gemini, is incapable. It was incapable of producing images of German soldiers that were not that were exclusively Caucasian. It was programmed to do this. You could not produce German soldiers that were Caucasian, consistently Caucasian at all. It always, by rule, had to produce other ethnicities. It's because Google, being a Silicon Valley company, imposed those sorts of social strictures. Can you see where I'm going with this? Why is it that on an issue about human rights abuses in China, which is contentious, it is certainly the case, it is a reasonable answer from that Chinese large language model that the human rights abuses have been used for political purposes to pursue an anti-China agenda. That is true, in my opinion. It is also true that there are human rights abuses going on there, but how is it wrong for the Chinese state to be imposing those sorts of political strictures on their AI, but it's okay for Western companies to impose DEI on theirs? There was a really interesting article because, of course, there is academic approval for this. We have left-wing academics, and really those two things are diametrically opposed. I don't think you can hold left-wing views and claim to be an academic anymore. But this comes to us from the Australian Academy of the Humanities, which was written at the time and was a justification for doing wokery in large language models as Google did with Gemini. This guy writes, what these bias mitigation techniques show us. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I jumped too far into the article. One moment. Only 3 weeks after its introduction, Google decided to suspend the image generation feature of its newest generation AI after accusations it contained an anti-white bias. The move follows a series of viral posts from ex-users who were outraged that prompts used to generate images of American founding fathers, Vikings, the Pope, and 1943 German soldiers returned images of almost exclusively Black, Asian, First Nations, and other racially diverse people. This guy writes, brittle models, brittle solutions. What these bias mitigation technologies show us is how brittle these models can be. Fixing a problem with a model is not as easy as finding new training data. Google learned that the hard way when it controversially tried to improve its facial recognition dataset by giving homeless people with dark skin gift cards in exchange for their biometric data. Indeed, AI companies are already under fierce criticism over the unethical collection and use of copyrighted materials. And then he comes to paranoid whiteness. But before we get to that, back in the day, there was a problem like Hewlett-Packard. People probably don't remember, but about 15 years ago, Hewlett-Packard was an early adopter, 15, maybe even 20 years ago, an early adopter of facial recognition on unlocking, like you get, like people use on their phones. They introduced it into their laptops. The problem was with it, they sold millions of these laptops, and it couldn't identify Black and Oriental people. All right, the face recognition only worked if you were white. So it is understandable that Silicon Valley is pretty sensitive about these matters. But of course, here comes the leftist justification for this sort of programmed in wokery to large language models. The choice by commentators to attribute Gemini's technical flaws to a woke conspiracy rather than the brittle solutions is indicative of a greater paranoia that has become a defining feature of digital culture. Here, the paranoia isn't caused by bad faith actors spreading misinformation or deep fakes that are indiscernible from real images. Instead, it is technical errors and automated procedures that produce flawed and fake images that affirm the beliefs of conspiracy-minded people. In this case, it surfaces latent or perhaps explicit fears of white replacement that have previously been incorporated as part of anti-immigration rhetoric and which now circulate again in anti-DEI rhetoric. This is the point. To left-wing academics, DEI is good. Large language models shouldn't tell the truth because in postmodernism, we get to define what the truth is. It is right and proper that German soldiers in 1943 are diverse. Never mind historical fact. What matters is postmodern fact. The very real attacks, this guy continues, and erasures of the labor of racialized and marginalized people in AI companies takes a backseat to the imagined erasures of white people in AI-generated images. Imagined? It's a stone-cold fucking truth, mate. It has led people like Musk to claim the programming that has produced these AI images of black and brown people are anti-civilizational because they do not reproduce the whiteness he is looking for. What do you reckon, Eeryk?
Well, it was interesting. I was like, the first time I'd heard of that DeepSeek app was literally yesterday when it came on the 6 p.m. news. And I was like, so you're just telling me that it took $1 trillion out of, you know, out of the big players, and then it's just got given worldwide news coverage at the same time? Well, that's only going to make things better, isn't it? So first time I've heard of it. But of course, as with anything really coming out of China, especially things related to technology and this sort of stuff, you always have to, take a step back and think, okay, is it worth touching that at all? Probably not. But after, I suppose, you weigh up your balances. But I do find it all very interesting, and the pointing out of the hypocrisy between, the Chinese Communist Party obviously have their hands all over it versus Silicon Valley having their massive influence over things. It is a degree of hypocrisy, but I suppose at least Silicon Valley isn't technically the executive branch of the United States government, are they? So there is a point of difference to be had there. But yeah, I mean, I don't really utilize this kind of stuff myself too often. I touch Grok a little bit just to, I don't know, sometimes, usually to have a little bit of fun. But with the exception of that, I haven't really dabbled with this sort of thing too much. So I'm not really keeping my eyes open for it, which is probably why I never heard of it up until yesterday.
Yeah, well, I think it's worthwhile keeping it because this is the thing with technology, right? It has a societal impact, and we have to be thinking about the impacts of these technologies. For those who are fans of the author Iain M. Banks, Iain M. Banks, he wrote a series of science fiction novels. He's passed away now, and God bless him. But in his Culture series, he had a whole bunch of ships that were sentient, and they had very, very interesting names. And one of the names that always resonated with me was a ship that was called What Are the Civilian Applications? And this is the case, right? Like these days, so much of our lives are impacted by technology. It is incumbent upon all of us to ensure that our civil rights and our liberties are enhanced by technology and not diminished. Which brings me on to this next article. Now, in terms of the ethics of it, I really enjoyed this article from this dude, Yaniv Golan, who was talking about this yesterday. But he also had a really, really good synopsis on the difference between kind of the cathedral and the bazaar. For those who aren't familiar with software development methodologies, there's this dude called Eeryk Raymond who wrote a seminal essay about 30 years ago about software development methodologies, the cathedral and the bazaar, and it's talking about the competition of ideas, look out mosquito, that you get, and the survival of the fittest in open source that you don't get in the closed source world. And it is a paradigm which can be applied to the walled gardens of social media that I was talking about before versus the open source, open protocol approach of the Fediverse. It's like the openness of Android phones from a whole bunch of different manufacturers versus the walled garden that is the Apple ecosystem. Now, this article is worth reading in full because this dude got right down into the ethics of a whole bunch of stuff, but he also touched on the technology, and that's the bit that I really wanted to read. This section is open source as a force multiplier. One of the loudest ongoing debates in AI is whether to open up model code or keep it locked behind a paywall. Proponents of open source argue that it boosts innovation and levels the playing field. Anyone can contribute improvements, identify flaws, or spin off new solutions. Critics raise worries about misuse, IP protection, and monetization. DeepSeek R1 planted its flag on the open source side, and that choice resonated. At a time when some large labs have been moving towards more guarded releases, the emergence of an open source rival with near cutting-edge performance sent ripples through the community and cost a whole bunch of investors $1 trillion. Models like DeepSeek R1 show us how open collaboration combined with resourceful hardware strategies can drive massive leaps without a 10-figure budget. Still, open source comes with trade-offs. If transparency clashes with local regulations, as seen with DeepSeek's censorship layer, does it truly democratize access, or does it merely reframe existing hierarchies? I think that is something that I'm going to have to think about. But this guy Yaniv Golan, I've never heard of him before, but I'll put a link up to this in the chat because, guys, do have a read of it. It is very, very interesting, and I think that I've got some thinking to do about what he said here, and I'd be interested in others' input to it. All right. Well, look, Eeryk, I see we've got about 5 minutes to go. I think we might go to the chat here. I'm sorry, guys. Yep. Okay. So there's an audio issue with Rumble. That happens from time to time. I don't know why, but the audio is always there and recording for some reason with Rumble. I've got onto their support, but sometimes every now and then the audio just doesn't come through. Simon Futta says, basically, I mean shit to New Zealand because my bloodline is Cherokee Nation and I was born in Arizona. That's fine. I prefer to stay to myself anyway. Kind of just want my inheritance back. Fair enough, Simon. Wonder if that comes up next week, the meeting down the road. I'm not sure what that means. Socialite says the better initialization is initials is the acronym. You mean is DIE rather than DEI. DEI is the outcome of that ideology. Yeah, which is very, very true. All right. Open source, says Socialite, is good for many positive reasons. So are open standards, young man, and open protocols. Eeryk, you got anything you want to any people you wanted to comment upon?
Yeah, so Troubled Mind says DeepSeek is Chinese Communist Party spyware. Just ask about the Square massacre and see what happens. He also says it's objectively better than most of the other guys, being open source, but doesn't use their app or direct website. Since it's open source, it can be run locally. Goes on to say he uses these tools every day, and says open source is the future. OpenAI and others that hide behind corporate masks are the enemy of the common folk. Phil also says they are heavily invested in AI development too. I think referencing the top of the article. Lots of posts about people having trouble uninstalling and removing DeepSeek, which is interesting. I don't want to try myself. 3 years ago, that could be describing Facebook and the US government with respect to the censorship, the attempts to just manipulate everything. that comes through with the media narrative. His mate argues with the Meta AI all the time, questioning its previous responses. It lies too. I have actually seen a few screenshots of chats with AI bots or these thingamajiggy bots that have them literally contradicting themselves. It's quite fascinating to watch them kind of get tied up in knots and play. It's like playing with your food. I find it quite funny. One day you won't be able to do that, and they'll have full control, and you'll be like being manipulated by the most devious creature to have ever existed. But yes, Gas Giant says Ian Banks is a good read. So yeah, that's all we've got.
Gas Giant, just on that, if you like Ian M. Banks, check out Ken MacLeod. Ken MacLeod was his protege. He's a fantastic writer. Where Ian M. Banks is quite utopian, Ken MacLeod is very, very dystopian. He's a fantastic writer, well worth reading. All right, well, we've got 2 minutes to go. I think I'll probably say good evening, everyone. Thank you for watching the show, and I'll let Eeryk take us out.
Sweet. Yeah, so thank you everyone for tuning in this evening. It was quite nice having a very active chat over here on X, probably at Simon's expense, to be fair, but I'm sure he'll be back up and running on X next time out. An absolute pleasure as always, Simon. I learned a lot. We had a lot of focus on technology today, and I think a lot of people probably have a similar position there. But I think we are making a regular thing of this, I suppose. So I think it's the same time again next Wednesday, as far as we know, unless anything changes. So I think Simon TV, Revenge of the Simon TV tonight, wasn't it? And I do believe there was a lot of Simon TV influence tonight. So yeah, he's going to get his revenge on X one way or the other, and I think that was by kind of giving a bit of a props to the likes of Mastodon for some reason, but whatever. But yeah, I think that about does us. Thank you everyone for tuning in this evening. Thanks again, Simon, and I hope everyone has an absolutely lovely rest of their week.
Thanks, mate. It's always good to see you. And yep, let's do another one next Wednesday. And guys, I'll be on Sunday night for my regular Simon TV 8:30 slot. Despite what Socialite says, I am going to play some doof music. Eeryk, are you going to be doing a show by yourself at all before next Wednesday?
Potentially. I think likely. But yeah, likely.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thanks, mate. And thanks, everyone. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday or Wednesday. Thanks for tuning in.